The dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the bare bulb hanging overhead, a lonely star in a subterranean sky. Liam stood in the center of the basement, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying paper, and something else, something sweet and sharp, the ghost of a bygone era. This was his kingdom now. The decree was final, the ink dry. Isabella, his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, had taken the penthouse. With its panoramic views of the city, its marble countertops, its cavernous walk-in closets, its very essence of polished, performative success. She had taken the life they had built, or rather, the life he had built and she had decorated, and she had left him the basement. "It's creepy down there, Liam, full of junk," she had said, her voice not cruel but worse, dismissive, as if she were talking about taking out the trash. "Honestly, I'm doing you a favor. You can store your things until you find a place. Just don't take too long. We need the space cleared for a proper wine cellar." We. The word had been a small, sharp icicle to the heart. She and her father, Richard, had already moved on to planning the future of the building, a future that had no room for him. Liam ran a hand over the rough, splintery wood of a crate. It was one of nearly 100, stacked in silent rows, shrouded in cobwebs. Junk. To Isabella and to her family, this was the forgotten detritus of a dead century. To Liam, it was the punchline to a joke they would never understand. He had found them when he was first surveying the building, long before the first sledgehammer ever swung. Tucked away in a false wall behind a crumbling brick facade, these crates were a secret he had kept folded in his back pocket for 3 years. He walked over to a small, makeshift shelf he'd erected on a clean section of wall. Upon it sat a single bottle, its glass dark, its label a faded, water-stained relic. He'd cleaned this one bottle with the care of a museum curator. The light caught the faint glint of embossed lettering. Old Overholt, 1921, for medicinal use only. Prohibition. A time of secrets, of hidden value, of fortunes made in the shadows. He thought of Isabella upstairs, probably sipping champagne with her parents, celebrating her victory. She thought she had won. She thought she had taken everything of value. She didn't know that the real treasure wasn't in the sky, but deep in the earth. Within 3 months, her entire world, built on the unstable foundation of arrogance and appearances, would crumble into dust. And it would be the creepy basement that brought it all down. Before we continue this story of vindication, I just have to ask, have you ever felt underestimated? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy seeing arrogance meet its match, do me a favor and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. You won't want to miss how this unfolds. The final meeting in the lawyer's office had been the apex of their condescension. It wasn't a negotiation, it was a coronation. Isabella sat beside her father, Richard Thorne, a man whose posture was as rigid and unyielding as his worldview. Her mother, Eleanor, was there too, a silent, perfectly coiffed statue of disapproval. They formed a united front, a tribunal passing judgment on Liam's failed attempt to integrate into their world. "Let's be sensible, Liam," Richard had said, his voice a low, rumbling engine of patronage. He spread his hands on the polished mahogany table as if presenting an act of great charity. "Isabella is willing to be more than generous. The penthouse is, by any metric, the primary asset of the marriage. Its value has tripled since you two acquired the building." Liam remained silent, his gaze steady. He had been the one to find the derelict pre-war building, a forgotten architectural gem languishing in a neighborhood just on the cusp of revitalization. He was an architect. He saw the bones, the potential, the soul of the place. He'd spent a year of his life personally overseeing its restoration, turning it from a ruin into a landmark. Richard had provided the capital, and in his mind, that was the only contribution that mattered. "We are prepared to let you walk away with your personal effects and a cash settlement of $50,000, Richard continued, leaning back. A clean break. It's more than fair. Isabella finally spoke, her voice smooth and practiced, as if she'd rehearsed this. Daddy, we should also let him have the contents of the basement. He was always so interested in that old junk. He can have it all. She turned to Liam, a thin, pitying smile on her lips. Think of it as a starter kit for your new life, Liam. Maybe you can sell some of it for scrap. The lawyer, a man who worked for Richard's firm, cleared his throat and made a note. So, to be clear, Mrs. Thorne DeMarco retains the asset known as Penthouse A, valued at approximately $4.2 million. Mr. DeMarco will receive a cash settlement of $50,000 and all miscellaneous contents currently stored in the basement level of the same property. Liam felt the weight of their collective gaze. They expected him to argue. They expected him to grovel, to fight for a larger share of the pie he had almost single-handedly baked. They wanted the drama. They wanted to see him reduced, to confirm their narrative that he was nothing without them. He looked from Richard's smug face to Eleanor's icy stare, and finally to Isabella. He saw no flicker of doubt, no memory of the man she once claimed to love. He saw only a reflection of her father's ambition and her mother's vanity. He picked up the pen. He didn't look at the numbers. He looked at the clause his own lawyer, a quiet, unassuming man they had openly mocked, had insisted on adding. And all miscellaneous contents currently stored in the basement level of the same property, the ownership of which will be transferred to Mr. DeMarco in perpetuity, free and clear of any and all future claims. It was ironclad. They were so focused on the grand prize, the glittering penthouse, that they hadn't even bothered to properly inspect the consolation prize they were tossing him. They saw a dark, damp room full of worthless clutter. They had no idea they were signing away a king's ransom. Fine, Liam said, his voice even. He signed his name. The stroke of the pen was not an act of surrender, but the drawing of a battle line. Richard smirked, a small, triumphant twitch of his lips. Good, sensible. As they stood to leave, Isabella paused and placed a hand on his arm. It was a cold, performative gesture. I do hope you'll be okay, Liam. Really. He looked down at her hand, then back into her eyes. I'll be more than okay, Isabella. She didn't hear the promise in his words. She only heard the quiet resignation she expected. She squeezed his arm lightly and walked away, leaving him to inherit his dusty, forgotten kingdom. He was no longer Liam DeMarco, husband of the wealthy Isabella Thorne. He was just Liam, the man in the basement. And for the first time in years, he felt the exhilarating thrill of freedom. The game had just begun. The humiliation hadn't started in the lawyer's office. It had been a slow, creeping poison, administered in small doses over years. The dinner parties were the worst. They were Richard and Eleanor's preferred stage, and Liam was the unwilling supporting actor in a play about their own magnificence. He remembered one night, about a year before the end, with perfect, painful clarity. The penthouse was filled with their friends, bankers, developers, society mavens, a flock of peacocks preening in the glow of the city lights. Liam had just won a small but prestigious award for a pro bono project he designed, a community arts center in a low-income neighborhood. He was proud of it. The design was innovative, sustainable, and had brought a spark of life to a neglected corner of the city. He'd made the mistake of mentioning it when one of the guests, a portly developer named Marcus, had asked what he'd been tinkering with. Richard, holding a glass of scotch that cost more than the weekly grocery bill of any family in that neighborhood, had laughed. It was a booming, dismissive sound that cut through the conversational hum. "Oh, that's Liam's little charity project," he announced to the room. "Very noble, designing little boxes for the less fortunate. He's our family's own St. Francis of Assisi. Aren't you, Liam?" The table chuckled. It wasn't malicious laughter. It was the easy, thoughtless laughter of people who live so high above the world that they couldn't see the ground. Liam felt his face flush, a hot tide of anger and embarrassment. He looked at Isabella, pleading with his eyes for her to intervene, to defend him, to say something. She just smiled, a tight, social smile. "Daddy, be nice," she chided gently, but her tone was playful, not protective. It was the same tone she might use if he'd teased her about a new pair of shoes. She then turned the conversation effortlessly. "Marcus, you must tell me about the new resort in St. Bart's. Is it true the infinity pool is filled with mineral water?" And just like that, Liam and his little box were forgotten. He sat through the rest of the dinner in a state of quiet fury. He wasn't angry about the insult itself. He was used to Richard's condescension. He was shattered by Isabella's silence. It was a betrayal far deeper than any cutting remark. Her silence told him that she was one of them, that she valued the opinion of these shallow, arrogant people more than she valued his dignity. She had chosen her tribe, and he was not in it. He realized then that he had never truly been a part of their world. He was a curiosity, an accessory. Isabella had been drawn to his passion, his creativity, his groundedness, all the things her world lacked. But she treated those qualities like exotic souvenirs from a trip to a foreign land. Interesting to look at, but to be kept on a shelf, not integrated into her actual life. He was the artistic husband, a bit of rough-hewn charm to offset her polished perfection. It was during that period that he discovered the false wall in the basement. He'd been down there with a structural engineer long after the main renovation was complete, chasing a persistent leak. He was tapping along the foundation when he heard it, a hollow echo where there should have been solid brick. His architect's mind, trained to see what lies beneath the surface, was intrigued. That night, after Isabella was asleep, he'd returned with a hammer and a chisel. Behind the crumbling mortar and modern brickwork was an older wall, made of stones fitted together with expert care. And in that wall, a recessed section, boarded up with thick, age-darkened planks. It took him 2 hours of careful, silent work to pry the first one loose. The smell that wafted out was the one he now lived in, damp earth, and that bewitching, alcoholic sweetness. He shone his phone's flashlight inside and saw them. The crates, stamped with the names of distilleries that had vanished a century ago. He knew instantly that he had found something special, a Prohibition-era stash. The building had once been owned by a notorious bootlegger, a man who had supplied the city's elite during the driest years of the 20th century. The stories were local legend, but Liam had found the proof. He sealed the wall back up, patching the outer brickwork so perfectly that no one would ever know it had been disturbed. It became his secret, a silent rebellion. While they toasted their own success in the penthouse above, he knew that a fortune of a different kind, a fortune of history and rarity, lay sleeping in the darkness below. He didn't know its monetary value then, not exactly, but he knew it was his. It was the one part of the building, the one part of his life with Isabella, that they hadn't tainted with their money and their condescension. It was real, and he held on to that secret like a promise. Now, in the present, the faint thumping of a bass line vibrated through the concrete floor above him. Isabella was wasting no time. A housewarming party for one, a celebration of her liberation. Liam ignored it. He had work to do. He had spent the first few days creating a small, habitable zone in the vast, tomb-like space. He'd run a heavy-duty extension cord from the only working outlet, set up a few powerful work lamps, and partitioned off a 10 by 10-foot corner with thick plastic sheeting to keep the dampness at bay. Inside this makeshift room, he had an air mattress, a small electric kettle, and a folding table that served as his desk. It was monastic, but it was his. He spent his days in a methodical rhythm. In the mornings, he would go to a nearby gym to shower and work out, then to the public library, where he used the high-speed internet to manage his few remaining architectural clients, and, more importantly, to research. He dove into the arcane world of antique spirits. He learned about ullage, the air gap in the bottle, and how it signified evaporation and age. He learned about the distilleries, the bottlers, the tax stamps, and the telltale signs of forgeries. He was an architect by trade, a researcher by necessity. His mind, trained to understand structure and detail, absorbed it all. In the afternoons, he would return to his subterranean home. He began the painstaking process of cataloging his inheritance. He bought dozens of archival quality boxes, microfiber cloths, and a dehumidifier that hummed day and night, slowly winning the war against the damp. He handled each bottle as if it were a priceless artifact, which he was beginning to suspect it was. He gently wiped away the grime of a century, his touch light and reverent. The labels were a litany of forgotten American enterprise: Green River, Gibson's, T.W. Samuels. One evening, he was carefully logging a dozen bottles of a particularly rare rye when he heard footsteps on the metal staircase that led down from the building's main hallway. The door creaked open, spilling the bright, sterile light of the corridor into his dim world. "Liam, are you actually living down here?" It was Isabella. She was silhouetted in the doorway, a wineglass in her hand. Behind her, another figure giggled, one of her friends, probably Tiffany or Chloe. "I am," Liam said, not getting up from his work table. He remained perfectly still. Isabella stepped in, followed by a blonde woman Liam vaguely recognized. They wrinkled their noses in unison. "Oh my God, it smells like a crypt," the friend whispered loudly. Isabella took another step, her expensive heels clicking on the concrete. Her eyes, accustomed to the penthouse's warm, professionally designed lighting, struggled to adjust. "What on earth are you doing? It looks like you're setting up a laboratory for a mad scientist." She gestured with her wineglass at his neat rows of bottles and his cataloging station. "I'm organizing my things," Liam said, his voice neutral. "Your things?" Her friend, whose name was apparently Ashley, stepped forward. "Izzy, he's got a whole liquor store down here. Is this what was in all those gross old boxes?" She peered at a bottle Liam had just cleaned. "Ew, it looks like swamp water." Isabella laughed, that same light, dismissive laugh from the dinner party. "I told you it was junk. Liam, honestly, this is sad. You can't live like this. People are going to talk." People are going to talk. That was the core of it. Not his well-being, but the potential for gossip. The embarrassment he might cause her by existing in this state. "Don't worry about me, Isabella," he said, his eyes meeting hers. He held up the bottle of swamp water. "I'm finding it quite illuminating." She didn't understand. She just shook her head, a gesture of pity. "Well, whatever. Richard's lawyers are drawing up a notice. You have 30 days to get all this stuff out. We've hired a designer for the wine cellar, and the contractors need to start demolition." She turned to leave, her friend already halfway up the stairs. At the door, she paused. "And Liam, try not to look so defeated. It's not a good look." The door closed, plunging him back into the quiet dimness. Defeated. She thought he looked defeated. He looked down at the bottle in his hand. It was a 1919 Guggenheimer Pure Rye. He'd read about it online just that afternoon. A complete case had sold at auction 2 years ago for a staggering sum. He had at least 4 cases. He placed the bottle back on the table with a steady hand. He wasn't defeated. He was armed. And his enemies had no idea they were walking into a war. The notice arrived a week later, delivered by a courier who looked relieved to hand over the envelope and retreat from the creepy basement entrance. It was a masterwork of legal intimidation, thick with jargon and veiled threats. It referred to Liam as the occupant and his priceless collection as miscellaneous debris. It gave him 21 days to vacate the premises and remove all personal effects, after which the building's management, a company owned by Richard Thorne, would dispose of any and all remaining items at the occupant's expense. Dispose of. The phrase sent a chill down his spine that had nothing to do with the basement's ambient temperature. They would literally throw it all in a dumpster, laughing about it over dinner. The arrogance was breathtaking. He folded the letter and placed it on his desk, next to a growing stack of research. It was time to stop being a researcher and start being a strategist. His nights of study had led him to one name again and again: Arthur Pym. Pym was not some flashy television appraiser. He was a semi-retired historian, the author of the definitive 3-volume academic text, The Distiller's Art in the Age of Prohibition. He was a legend in a tiny, rarefied world. He rarely took on private clients, preferring to work with museums and auction houses. Getting his attention would be difficult. Liam composed the email with the precision of an architect drafting a blueprint. He kept it short, professional, and intriguing. Subject: inquiry regarding a potential pre-1920s unopened collection. Dear Mr. Pym, my name is Liam DeMarco. I am writing to you on the recommendation of your published work. I have recently come into possession of a significant and what I believe to be undisturbed collection of American whiskey, seemingly stored since the early 1920s. The collection comprises approximately 100 wooden crates, most of which appear to be sealed. I have identified several distilleries of note, including Guggenheimer, Old Overholt, and Green River. The provenance is compelling, tying the location to a historically significant figure in Prohibition-era distribution. I understand your time is valuable, but the potential historical importance of this find compels me to reach out to an expert of your stature. I have attached 3 photographs of a representative sample. I would be grateful for any initial thoughts you might have, and would be open to discussing a formal consultation at your convenience. Sincerely, Liam DeMarco. He attached the photos, one of a sealed crate, its stenciling faded but legible, one of a row of corked and wax-sealed bottles, their labels obscured by dust, and a close-up of the Guggenheimer bottle he had cleaned, the pure rye declaration clear and bold. He hit send and felt his heart hammering against his ribs. He had cast his line into the deep. Now all he could do was wait to see if the Leviathan would bite. For 2 days there was nothing. Liam's anxiety grew with every passing hour. He imagined his email being instantly deleted by a stern assistant. He imagined Pym scoffing at another amateur who thought he'd found treasure in his grandfather's attic. He continued his cataloging, but his focus was fractured. The 30th day deadline from Isabella's verbal warning loomed, and the legal notice gave him even less time. The clock was ticking. On the 3rd morning, as he sat in the library nursing a cup of coffee, the notification popped up on his laptop. New mail from Arthur Pym. His breath caught. He clicked it open. Mr. DeMarco, the photographs are compelling, particularly the crate markings and the bottle shape. 99 times out of 100, these inquiries lead to well-intentioned fakes, or more commonly, worthless rot. I am intrigued enough to say that this may be the 100th time. However, photographs can be deceiving. The condition of the corks, the ullage, the clarity of the spirit itself, these things can only be assessed in person. The name Guggenheimer, in this context, is of particular interest to me. I am based in Chicago. My travel schedule is typically booked months in advance. Where is this collection located? Regards, A. Pym. Liam's hands trembled slightly as he typed his reply. He gave the city but not the address. He explained the sensitive nature of the situation, the impending disposal of the items, the need for absolute discretion. He offered to cover all travel expenses and pay Pym's considerable daily consultation fee in cash up front. He was gambling the last of his $50,000 settlement on this. It was everything he had left, apart from the basement's contents. Another agonizing day passed. Then the reply came. It was 2 sentences long. Mr. DeMarco, I find myself with an unexpected opening in my schedule. I can be there on Friday. Send the address and instructions. Discretion is the foundation of my profession. Friday. It was 2 days away. A surge of adrenaline, potent and pure, washed through him. This was it. The tide was about to turn. That afternoon, he received another visit, This time it was Richard. He didn't bother to come down the stairs. He stood at the top, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the grime of the hallway. "Liam," he called down, his voice echoing in the stairwell. "Just a reminder, the clock is ticking, 20 days left. I have a buyer for the building, a very serious one, and the sale is contingent on a full inspection, including this basement. I don't want your junk complicating a multi-million-dollar deal. Do you understand?" "I understand perfectly, Richard," Liam called back, his voice calm and clear. "Good," Richard said, and then he was gone. Liam smiled to himself in the dim light. A multi-million-dollar deal. Richard had no idea. The real multi-million-dollar deal was sitting right here, in dusty crates, waiting for its story to be told. The 2 days leading up to Arthur Pym's arrival were a blur of nervous energy and meticulous preparation. Liam's challenge was twofold. He had to prepare the collection for a professional assessment while ensuring Pym's visit remained completely secret. Isabella still lived in the penthouse, and her parents were frequent visitors. The building's doorman, a man named George, who was loyal to the Thorns, was another obstacle. Liam couldn't risk Pym, with his scholarly air and likely instrument cases, being announced or even noticed. He devised a plan. He emailed Pym detailed instructions, framing it as a matter of professional discretion rather than a clandestine operation. Pym was to arrive at a specific time, 2:15 p.m., a dead zone in the building's daily traffic. He was to take a service elevator in the adjacent alley, an entrance Liam knew was never monitored. Liam provided the access code he still had from his construction management days. He would meet him there and escort him directly to the basement, bypassing the lobby and any prying eyes entirely. On Friday morning, Liam did a final sweep of the basement. He had arranged a section of the crates into a sort of gallery, opening one crate of each major variety to display the bottles within. He set up a second table with a powerful, color-corrected lamp, a magnifying glass, and several clean wine glasses for assessing the liquid's color and texture. He wanted Pym to see that he was serious, that this wasn't some amateur treasure hunter's messy hoard. The space, though still a basement, now had the focused, organized feel of an archaeological site. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. He kept glancing at his watch, his ears straining for any sound from the service corridor. At 2:13 p.m., he heard the low hum of the service elevator arriving. He moved to the fire door that connected the basement to the corridor, his heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm. This was the moment of truth. If Pym was who he claimed to be, and if the whiskey was what Liam hoped it was, his life was about to change. If not, he had just spent the last of his money on a fool's errand. The elevator doors slid open. A man stepped out. He was in his late 60s, with a shock of unruly white hair, spectacles perched on the end of his nose, and a tweed jacket that looked as if it had been a trusted companion on many journeys. He carried a single, well-worn leather satchel. He looked less like a high-powered appraiser and more like a retired university professor. "Mr. DeMarco?" he asked, his voice a dry, academic whisper. "Mr. Pym, thank you for coming," Liam said, shaking the man's cool, dry hand. "This way." He led Pym through the corridor and into the basement, closing the heavy door behind them. For a moment, Arthur Pym simply stood there, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. He took a deep breath, and a slow smile spread across his face. "Oh my," he murmured, his voice filled with a reverence that sent a jolt of hope through Liam. "That smell, that's the real thing. The angels have been taking their share for a very, very long time." He walked slowly towards the assembled crates, his movements deliberate and full of purpose. He didn't touch anything at first. He simply looked, his gaze sweeping over the scene like a scholar reading a sacred text. He peered at the stenciling on the crates, nodding to himself. He surveyed the rows of bottles Liam had laid out. "Remarkable preservation," he said softly. "The consistent temperature and darkness. It's a perfect time capsule." He finally turned to Liam, his eyes bright with intellectual excitement. "You said the provenance was tied to a historical figure?" "The building was constructed in 1910 by a man named Cormac Corky Corrigan," Liam explained. "He was one of the city's most notorious bootleggers. The official story is that he lost everything in the crash of 1929 and died penniless. I found these in a hidden cellar behind a false wall in the foundation." Pym's eyes widened slightly. "Corky Corrigan. Of course, the Corrigan Syndicate. It was always rumored he had a personal reserve that was never found after the FBI raided his warehouses. It was considered a myth, a ghost story for collectors." He looked around the room, a look of dawning wonder on his face. "Mr. DeMarco, I believe we may have just found the ghost." Pym set his leather satchel on the table and opened it. It was not filled with documents, but with specialized tools. A cork puller with a long, two-pronged extractor, a small, high-intensity penlight, and several vials. He put on a pair of thin cotton gloves. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the bottle of Guggenheimer rye. "Please," Liam said, his voice tight with anticipation. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in forensic appraisal. Pym examined the bottle from every angle, using his penlight to inspect the ullage and check for sediment. He talked as he worked, his quiet voice filling the basement. "The fill level is high for its age, suggesting excellent cork and seal integrity. See the way the glass was molded? The slight imperfections? Consistent with the manufacturing techniques of the era." Finally, he turned to the cork. "This is the moment of truth," he said. "If the cork has disintegrated, the whiskey will be oxidized. Interesting to a historian, but worthless to a collector." He chose his tool, the twin-pronged extractor designed to pull old corks without breaking them. He inserted it with surgical precision, his movements slow and practiced. He twisted gently, easing the cork upward millimeter by millimeter. Liam held his breath. The cork came free with a soft, satisfying thump. It was intact. Pym immediately held the bottle to his nose, inhaling deeply. He closed his eyes. "Astonishing," he breathed. "The angels got their share, but they left the soul behind." He poured a tiny amount, no more than a teaspoon, into one of the clean glasses. He didn't taste it. He swirled it, observing its color and viscosity against the light. "Look at that color," he said, his voice hushed. "Deep amber, no cloudiness. The legs on the glass. It's still alive. This isn't just whiskey, Mr. DeMarco. It's liquid history." He spent another hour examining other bottles from different crates. A 1917 Old Forester, a medicinal pint of cream of Kentucky. Each one received the same meticulous, reverent treatment. With each intact cork he pulled, with each affirmative nod, the weight on Liam's shoulders lessened. The hope grew brighter. Finally, Pym stood back, taking off his cotton gloves. He looked at Liam, a serious expression on his face. "You have to understand," he began, "that valuing a collection like this is not a simple science. It's an art. It depends on rarity, condition, and provenance. A single bottle of this quality can fetch thousands at auction. A full documented case can command a premium." He paused, looking around the room at the silent stacks of crates. "You mentioned approximately 100 crates. 97, to be exact," Liam confirmed. "Most containing a dozen bottles. Some are pints, some quarts." Pym did a quick calculation in his head, his lips moving silently. He took off his spectacles and polished them with a handkerchief. "Mr. DeMarco," he said, his voice regaining its formal, academic tone, "based on a preliminary conservative assessment, what you have here is not just a collection. It is arguably the most significant single discovery of Prohibition-era American spirits in the last 50 years. Liam felt his knees go weak. He gripped the edge of the table to steady himself. "And the value?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Arthur Pym looked him directly in the eye. "There is a particular subset here," he said, pointing to a series of crates in the back, marked with a small, hand-painted blue star. I saw the manifest stenciled on the side. It's Corrigan's personal blend, what he called the Mayor's Reserve. It was made for his most important clients. It was legendary. It was thought to be a complete myth. He took a deep breath. That reserve alone, if the condition holds across the cases, is worth 7 figures. Easily. 7 figures. The words hung in the air, seeming to displace the very dust motes dancing in the light. Conservatively, Pym continued, putting his glasses back on, factoring in the Guggenheimer, the Old Forester, and the other mid-tier rarities, and assuming a consistent level of quality and preservation across the entire lot. A comprehensive auction estimate would be in the range of $6 to $7 million. He let the number land. Simple, devastating, final. 6, Liam started, the word catching in his throat. He couldn't finish. At a minimum, Pym said calmly, I suspect, given the provenance in the story, the final figure could be even higher. The media would have a field day with the Corky Corrigan's ghost narrative. We could be looking at something closer to 6.8, perhaps more. $6.8 million. Liam sank onto a wooden crate, the rough wood barely registering. The sound of the party from the penthouse, the memory of Isabella's pitying smile, Richard's booming laughter, the cold formality of the lawyer's office. It all swirled in his mind, then receded, rendered insignificant by the sheer, staggering weight of that number. It wasn't just money, it was vindication. It was leverage. It was power. It was the sound of a world rebalancing itself on its axis. I will need a few days to draft a formal appraisal document, Pym said, beginning to pack his satchel. It will be thorough, detailed, and notarized. It will stand up in any court of law, or any auction house. Thank you, Liam managed to say, finding his voice. Thank you, Mr. Pym. No, Mr. DeMarco, the old historian said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. He looked around the basement one last time, his eyes filled with a deep, professional satisfaction. Thank you. You've made a very old man very, very happy. After Pym left, vanishing as discreetly as he had arrived, Liam sat alone in the silence for a long time. He looked at the single bottle on his makeshift shelf, the old Overholt. It was no longer just a symbol of his secret. It was the vanguard of an army, the opening salvo in a war he was now certain to win. The notice from Richard's lawyers gave him 20 days. He smiled. It was more than enough time. He was no longer the man in the basement. He was the king in his castle, and the barbarians were about to come knocking at the gate. The days that followed Arthur Pym's visit were the quiet before the storm. Liam moved with a newfound sense of calm, a deep, settled confidence that had been absent for years. The ticking clock of the eviction notice no longer sounded like a threat. It sounded like a countdown to liberation. He continued his routine, gym, library, basement, but now his work had a laser focus. He wasn't just cataloging junk, he was curating a multi-million-dollar collection. The official appraisal arrived via a secure digital courier 4 days later. It was a 40-page document, dense with historical detail, chemical analysis, market comparisons, and high-resolution photographs. It was more than a valuation, it was a biography of the collection. The final page contained the summary, with the total estimated value typed in bold. $6,850,000 US. Liam printed 3 copies on high-quality paper at the library, had them notarized at a nearby bank, and sealed each one in a crisp manila envelope. One for him, one for his lawyer, and one for the grand finale. On the 19th day, with just 2 days left on the notice, the final confrontation began. It started as he knew it would, with a text from Isabella. Liam, I hope you've made arrangements. The contractors are coming Friday morning to gut the basement. Everything left behind will be disposed of. I'm serious. He didn't reply. He simply went about his preparations. He cleared his personal effects, the air mattress, the kettle, his clothes, and packed them into his car. He left the basement exactly as Pym had seen it, a curated exhibition of immense value, masquerading as a junk-filled cellar. The work lamps cast dramatic shadows on the stacked crates, illuminating the bottles he had arranged on the tables. The single bottle of Old Overholt remained on its shelf, a silent sentinel. The next afternoon, the Thursday before the deadline, he heard the familiar, heavy footsteps on the stairs. This time it wasn't just one person. It was a procession. The door swung open, and the light revealed Isabella, flanked by her father and mother. Richard held a folder, his face set in a grim, businesslike mask. Eleanor looked as if she were entering a leper colony, her hand clutching a silk scarf over her nose. "Liam," Richard boomed, his voice unnaturally loud in the enclosed space. "This is the last time we're going to have this conversation. You've ignored our notices. You've ignored Isabella's messages. This behavior is unacceptable." Liam was sitting at his work table, calmly polishing a bottle with a soft cloth. He didn't stand up. He simply looked at them, his expression unreadable. "Hello, Richard, Eleanor, Isabella." "Don't you hello us," Richard snapped. "I have a buyer for this building, a deal that will secure this family's future for a generation. Your squatting is jeopardizing it. I've come to make you one final offer. Out of the goodness of my heart and my lingering respect for the fact that you were once married to my daughter." He opened the folder and slid a single piece of paper onto the table. It was a cashier's check. $5,000, Richard announced. "Take it, sign this release form, and have all this garbage out of here by 9 a.m. tomorrow, or my crew will be here with dumpsters, and I will bill you for the privilege." Isabella stepped forward, her expression a careful mixture of pity and frustration. "Liam, please, just be reasonable. Take the money. It's a fresh start. You can't keep living like this, clinging to whatever this is. It's over." It was the word clinging that did it, as if he were pathetic, as if he were holding on to the scraps of a life they had generously discarded. Liam slowly placed the bottle he was holding back on the table. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes moving from Richard's arrogant sneer to Eleanor's pinched disdain, and finally to Isabella's beautifully constructed mask of concern. "You know, I was just thinking about our marriage, Isabella," he began, his voice soft, almost conversational. The quietness of it made them lean in, straining to hear. "I was thinking about all the dinner parties, the ones where your father would call my architectural work little boxes, and you would just smile and change the subject to someone's vacation home." Richard stiffened. "What does that have to do with anything?" "And I was thinking about the renovation of this very building," Liam continued, his gaze unwavering. "I spent a year of my life on this project. I chose every finish, managed every contractor, solved every problem. And at the grand opening party, your father stood up and took credit for the entire design, calling it his vision. And you, Isabella, you applauded." "It was my father's money that paid for it," she shot back, her composure cracking for the first time. "Yes, it was," Liam agreed calmly. "Money is the only thing your family truly understands. It's how you measure worth. My worth. You measured me, and you found me lacking. You decided I was a failed project, an investment that didn't pay off. So you liquidated the asset." He gestured around the basement. "And this was my severance package, the junk, the scrap, the worthless clutter you were so generous to let me have." He paused, letting the silence stretch. He had their full attention now. This wasn't the defeated man they expected. This was someone else. "You came down here to offer me $5,000 for what's in this room," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "You, Richard, a man who prides himself on being a shrewd businessman, are about to make the worst deal of your life." He reached over to the stack of manila envelopes. He picked one up. It felt heavy, solid. He slid it across the table, stopping it right in front of Richard, next to the $5,000 check. Richard stared at the envelope, then at Liam, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What is this? More of your nonsense?" "It's an appraisal," Liam said. "For the junk, for the miscellaneous debris. I had an expert come in. I thought, as a shrewd businessman, you might be interested in the market value of the assets you're so eager to dispose of." Isabella laughed, a short, nervous sound. "An appraisal? For this? Liam, have you lost your mind?" "Open it, Richard," Liam said, his voice hardening into a command. "Or don't. Either way, your crew is not setting foot in this basement tomorrow, because this basement, and everything in it, is now an asset under the management of my own legal counsel, and its value is slightly more than $5,000. With a huff of exasperation, Richard snatched the envelope. He ripped it open with a thumb, his movements jerky and irritated. He pulled out the 40-page document, bound neatly with a clip. He scoffed at the cover page, then flipped to the back, to the summary, to the final number. The change was instantaneous and profound. It was as if a switch had been flipped deep inside him, cutting power to his entire facade of blustering authority. The color drained from his face. His jaw, which had been set in a pugnacious line, went slack. His eyes, which had been narrowed in contempt, widened in stunned, horrified disbelief. He read the number, then read it again, his lips moving silently as if he couldn't process the zeros. "What?" he whispered. The booming voice was gone, replaced by a strangled, reedy sound. "No, this is a joke. This is fraudulent." Isabella, alarmed by her father's reaction, rushed to his side. She looked over his shoulder at the paper. Her reaction was different. It wasn't a sudden collapse. It was a slow-motion crumbling. Her perfectly constructed mask of pity and superiority began to crack and fall away, revealing the raw, grasping panic underneath. Her eyes darted from the paper to Liam, then to the crates, then back to Liam. For the first time, she was truly seeing the room, not as a symbol of his failure, but as the source of his unimaginable success. 6.8 million? She breathed, the words tumbling out in a rush of air. Dollars? Eleanor, who had been lingering by the stairs, finally moved forward. "Richard, what is it? What's wrong?" Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. He sank onto one of his own crates, his former crate, looking at Liam with an expression of pure, unadulterated shock. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. The tribunal was disbanded. The judges were now the accused. And Liam, the man they had sentenced to exile in a dusty basement, was now sitting on the throne. "It can't be," Richard finally stammered, shaking his head. "It's old whiskey, it's rot gut. It's the single largest private collection of Prohibition-era spirits discovered in half a century," Liam stated, his voice as solid and unyielding as the concrete floor. He quoted from Pym's report. "It includes the entire legendary, and until now, mythical, Mayor's Reserve from the Corky Corrigan Syndicate. It is, and I quote, an asset of immense historical and monetary value." He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto Richard's. "You were so busy looking up at your penthouse, you never bothered to see the treasure under your feet. You signed it all over to me. Do you remember? All miscellaneous contents. Your own lawyer drafted the clause. It's ironclad." Isabella finally found her voice, a high, desperate plea. Liam, listen to me. This is a mistake. This is marital property. We have to renegotiate. We didn't know." Liam let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor. It was the sound of a lock clicking into place. "Oh, you didn't know? That's the entire point, Isabella. You didn't know its value, so you thought it was worthless. And you thought I was worthless, so you threw us both away." He stood up, the full force of his presence filling the room. He was no longer the quiet, accommodating husband. He was a force to be reckoned with. There is no we, Isabella. There is no renegotiation. You made your choice. You chose the penthouse. You chose the sure thing, the status, the appearances. You left me with the creepy basement and its junk. He walked over to the makeshift shelf and picked up the single bottle of old Overholt. He held it up to the light. The funny thing about junk, he said softly, is that one person's trash is another person's treasure. And you, your father, your mother, you are the worst kind of appraisers. You only see the price tag. You never, ever see the value. He looked at the three of them, their faces a gallery of shock, greed, and dawning horror. They were no longer the arrogant elite. They were just people who had made a catastrophic mistake and were only just beginning to understand its scale. The silence in the basement was absolute, broken only by the faint, distant hum of the city, a world away. The reversal was complete. The king was in his counting house, and the jesters who had mocked him were finally, painfully, silent. The immediate aftermath was a flurry of panicked, desperate activity. Richard, recovering from his initial shock, immediately fell back on his default setting, blustering threats. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking so badly he could barely dial. "I'm calling my lawyer," he hissed, his voice raw with fury. "This is fraud, coercion. You tricked us. You misrepresented the assets. We'll see you in court for the rest of your miserable life, DeMarco." Liam remained unmoved. "Go ahead, Richard. Call him. Have him pull up the divorce decree that you yourself oversaw. The one where Isabella willingly, and with legal counsel, signed away all rights to the contents of this basement. The one where you laughed as you did it. Ask your lawyer what he thinks your chances are." Isabella, meanwhile, had shifted tactics. The panic had subsided, replaced by a chillingly pragmatic attempt at seduction. She came towards Liam, her hands outstretched, her face softening into a mask of contrived intimacy. "Liam, baby, listen," she whispered, trying to take his hand. He pulled it away. "We can fix this. This is our money. We found it together, really. Think of what we could do with it. We could travel. We could buy that villa in Tuscany we always talked about. This doesn't have to change anything between us." It was the most obscene thing he had ever heard. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and felt nothing but a profound and desolate pity. She was so transactional, so utterly blind to the chasm that now lay between them. "Anything between us?" he repeated, his voice incredulous. "Isabella, there is nothing between us. You made sure of that. The villa in Tuscany? We talked about that the same week you let your father humiliate me at that dinner party and said nothing. You don't want us. You want the money. The only thing that has changed is that you now believe I have it." He was using the moral mirror, forcing her to see the reflection of her own character. "When you thought I had nothing, you couldn't get away from me fast enough. You left me in a basement. You told me I looked defeated. Now you see these crates and you see a future in Tuscany. Do you have any idea how transparent that is? How pathetic?" Her face crumpled. The accusation, so plainly and calmly stated, was irrefutable. There was no defense against the truth. Eleanor, who had been a silent statue of horror, finally spoke. Her voice was thin and brittle. "Richard, he's right. The papers. We signed them." Her pragmatism was even colder than Isabella's. She saw the legal reality, and her face was a mask of furious regret. She wasn't mourning a relationship. She was mourning a lost fortune. Richard ended his call, his face ashen. His lawyer had clearly told him what Liam already knew. He was legally exposed. They had no claim. His bluster deflated, leaving behind the shrunken, desperate figure of a man who had been outplayed at his own game. "What do you want, Liam?" he asked, his voice heavy with defeat. "A cut? $1 million? 2? Name your price. Let's make a deal." Liam almost laughed. A deal. He was still trying to buy his way out of the consequences. There is no price, Richard. You don't get it. This was never about the money for me. It was about this. He gestured to the three of them, to their shocked and pleading faces. This moment, the moment you finally realized that you underestimated me. The moment you were forced to see that a person's worth isn't determined by their bank balance or the circles they move in. He walked to the basement door and opened it, flooding the room with the neutral light of the hallway. Now, get out of my property. They stared at him, stunned. Get out, he repeated, his voice like steel. Richard, for the first time in his life, obeyed an order from Liam DeMarco. He walked stiffly towards the stairs, his shoulders slumped. Eleanor followed, her face a thunderous mask. Isabella lingered, her eyes swimming with tears. Whether of regret or financial loss, Liam couldn't tell, nor did he care. Liam, please, she whispered one last time. Goodbye, Isabella, he said, his voice flat and final. He held the door as she walked past him, her perfume, the scent of their old life, washing over him one last time. He felt nothing. He closed the door, and the sound of their retreating footsteps faded. He was alone again in his kingdom. But it was no longer a refuge or a hiding place. It was a fortress. The silence that filled it was not the silence of loneliness, but the profound, satisfying silence of justice. He had not just won, he had prevailed. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in controlled deconstruction. Liam's lawyer, the same quiet man Richard had mocked, handled everything. He filed injunctions preventing the Thorne family or their representatives from entering the basement. He engaged a top-tier security firm to guard the building's service entrances. He officially informed Richard's buyer that a significant portion of the property, the basement, was not for sale and contained privately owned assets, effectively scuttling the deal Richard had been banking on. The Thornes, as predicted, tried to fight. Their lawyers sent a barrage of threatening letters, citing emotional distress, fraudulent inducement, and a dozen other baseless claims. Liam's lawyer calmly dismantled each one, responding with a single, unassailable defense: the signed and notarized divorce decree. The document they had once seen as their triumph was now their cage. The financial pressure on the Thornes mounted. Richard, it turned out, had been heavily leveraged. He had been counting on the sale of the building to cover a series of bad investments. Without it, his empire began to show cracks. Creditors started calling. The air of unassailable wealth that had always surrounded them began to dissipate. Isabella, in her desperation, became a ghost. She left pleading voicemails, sent long, rambling emails filled with nostalgic reminiscences of their early days, all of it a transparent prelude to a request for money. Liam instructed his lawyer to handle all communication. He created a wall of professional silence she could not breach. He knew that any engagement, even a negative one, was something she could twist into a sign of hope. He gave her nothing. One evening, about a month after the confrontation, he was packing the last of the collection. He had partnered with Arthur Pym to arrange a landmark auction with Sotheby's. The event, titled The Corrigan Collection, was already generating international buzz. He had decided to sell 80% of the whiskey. The other 20%, including the single bottle of Old Overholt and a few cases of the Mayor's Reserve, he would keep. Not as an investment, but as a reminder. His phone rang. It was an unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. Hello? Liam? The voice was hesitant, female, but it wasn't Isabella. It's Eleanor. Liam was silent, stunned. Of all the Thornes, she was the last one he ever expected to hear from. I know you have no reason to speak to me, she said, her voice strained. But I needed to say this. I'm not calling to ask for anything. Richard and Isabella, they still don't get it. They think this is about money. They think you got lucky. She paused, and he heard her take a shaky breath. But I saw your face that day, in the basement. This was about respect, and we never gave you any. I was a part of that. I judged you. I thought you weren't good enough for my daughter, for our family. I was wrong. You were too good for us. It was the closest thing to an apology he would ever receive from them. It was stark, stripped of warmth, but it was honest. Thank you for saying that, Eleanor, he said, his voice quiet. Richard is going to have to sell the penthouse, she said, the words flat and devoid of emotion. We're ruined, not just financially. Our name, it's all gone. I suppose it's what we deserve. She hesitated. I hope you find some happiness, Liam. Goodbye. She hung up before he could reply. He stood there, phone in his hand, processing her words. I suppose it's what we deserve. It was a moment of true, painful clarity, poetic justice. They had worshipped at the altar of status and appearances, and now they had lost it all. Their penthouse, the very symbol of their superiority, was being sacrificed to pay for their arrogance. Liam didn't feel triumph. He didn't feel joy. He felt a quiet, somber sense of closure. The war was over. The ghosts of the past had been laid to rest, both his and Corky Corrigan's. He looked at the empty space where the crates had been, then at the few he was keeping. The basement was no longer creepy. It was just a room. Its power, its magic, had been in the secret it held. And now that the secret was out, it was time for him to leave, to step out of the shadows and back into the light. 6 months later, the city was buzzing. The Corrigan collection auction had shattered all records, fetching a final total of over $9 million. The story was everywhere. The forgotten bootlegger's treasure, the underestimated husband, the arrogant wife who'd thrown away a fortune. The narrative had a mythic quality that the media and the public adored. But Liam was nowhere to be found. He had shunned all interviews, disappearing from the spotlight as quickly as he had entered it. He was not interested in becoming a celebrity. His vindication was a private matter. He sat in his new office, a clean, minimalist space in a modest downtown building. It was the headquarters of the DeMarco Foundation for Architectural Preservation. With a portion of the auction proceeds, he had created an organization dedicated to identifying, restoring, and repurposing historic buildings, providing grants to young architects who shared his vision. He was doing the work he loved, on his own terms, creating real, lasting value in the world. He was building things that would stand the test of time, a legacy far more meaningful than a penthouse view. On his desk, next to blueprints for a 19th century library he was saving from the wrecking ball, sat the bottle of Old Overholt. It was the only piece of the collection he kept on display. It wasn't a trophy of his victory over the thorns. It was a reminder of his own resilience, a symbol of the hidden worth that lies within all things and all people, waiting to be discovered. Isabella, he had heard, had moved to a small apartment across town. Her parents had retired to Florida, to a modest condo, their social standing in the city erased. She had tried to rebrand herself as a lifestyle influencer, but the story of the basement followed her, a shadow she couldn't outrun. Her followers saw her not as an arbiter of taste, but as a cautionary tale. She was a living symbol of superficiality. Liam felt no malice towards her. He simply felt disconnected. She was a chapter in a book he had finished reading long ago. His focus was on the future, on the structures he could save, on the communities he could help build. His wealth hadn't changed him. It had amplified who he already was. It had given him the freedom to pursue his passion with integrity. He thought about the nature of justice. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making others suffer as you had suffered. True justice, he realized, was about restoration. It was about restoring your own dignity, your own peace of mind, your own sense of self. The Thorns had faced the consequences of their actions, a downfall brought about not by his hand, but by their own character flaws. He had simply refused to save them from themselves. The true victory wasn't the money, it was the freedom he now had to live a life aligned with his values. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had faced humiliation with dignity and had emerged not bitter, but stronger. He had turned their greatest insult into his greatest asset. He had taken the darkness they had relegated him to and found the light within it. And so, Liam's story comes to a close. It's a powerful reminder that true worth is never about outward appearances, but about the hidden strength and integrity within. What do you think? Was the outcome truly just? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found this story satisfying, please hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption. Until next time, remember to look for the value in places others might overlook.